Okay, let's unpack this. Today we are attempting a deep dive into a figure so colossal, his impact wasn't just on his own generation, but on, the next 2,000 years of global politics.
It really is staggering when you think about it.
We are exploring Gaius Julius Caesar, born around 100 BC, and his story. It's more than just a biography, right? It's really the autopsy report for the Roman Republic.
That is the perfect way to frame it. Caesar was a Roman general, a statesman, an author, and of course, ultimately, a dictator.
A man whose trajectory involved the bloody conquest of Gaul.
Forming the highly transactional First Triumvirate, defeating his great rival Pompey in a civil war, and then, well, assuming a position of near-unchallenged power.
So he didn't just participate in the fall of the Republic.
Oh, no. You could argue he was the primary architect of its destruction.
And the assassination, which, was meant to restore the constitutional government, it did exactly the opposite.
Completely. It triggered a new, final series of civil wars that just paved the way for his great-nephew and adopted heir, Octavian, to establish the Roman Empire as Augustus.
So to understand the end of Rome's great experiment in, shared governance, we have to understand the man who broke it.
And our mission today is to synthesize this massive story using a really incredibly rich stack of sources. We have Caesar's own accounts, his Commentari de Bello Gallico and Commentari de Bello Civili.
Which are brilliant literature, no doubt.
Absolutely. But they are also fundamentally polished, self-serving political instruments. They're propaganda, really.
So we have to balance that. And crucially, we can balance it with the perspectives of those who actually lived through his rise.
Exactly. We'll draw on the letters and speeches of Cicero, who gives us that on-the-ground, often terrified perspective.
And the contemporary history from Sallust, and of course the indispensable, though often anecdotal, later biographies.
Suetonius and Plutarch. They provide all the personal details and the drama that, really keep his story alive.
So the goal is to connect the big political maneuvering to the personal ambitions that drove this one man.
And to grasp his lasting significance, you don't even need to look at the battlefield. You just need to look at language. Consider this remarkable piece of historical nomenclature.
You're talking about his name.
His own family name, his cognomen Caesar, it became synonymous with political supremacy.
I find this just astonishing. His name was used as a title for succession throughout the entire Roman Empire, and it is the direct linguistic root of the German Kaiser.
And a Russian Tsar or Tsar.
It's an unbroken line.
It's a continuous political legacy that is nearly unparalleled in Western history. The sources note that for approximately 2,000 years, from the first Roman emperors right up until the mid-20th century.
The last Tsar in Bulgaria, 1946.
Exactly. There was almost always at least one head of state in Europe bearing his name in some form. That tells you the scope of the political shadow he cast.
Okay, so let's jump into his beginnings. We know the name is eternal, but the gens Julius Caesar's patrician family was not exactly riding the crest of the political wave during the Middle Republic.
Not at all. They had pedigree, sure, but they lacked immediate power.
And what was that pedigree?
Well, they famously claimed descent from Julius, the son of the Trojan hero Aeneas.
Which meant they traced their lineage directly back to
the goddess Venus herself. And that divine claim would become politically very useful later, especially when his bearer, Octavian, started working on his whole cult of personality.
But at this point, politically, the Julius Caesars were often on the sidelines.
Right. They didn't produce their first consul until 157 BC, and while Caesar's father did serve as governor of Asia, they just weren't the dominant political force of the moment.
And his early life was immediately defined by this massive political conflict that threatened to end his career before it even began.
You mean the dictatorship of Lucius Cornelius Sulla?
Exactly. This period really revealed Caesar's defiance, didn't it?
It was a moment of true existential peril for him. He was initially named Flemen Dialis, the high priest of Jupiter.
Which sounds impressive.
It was a position of immense religious honor, but it was politically crippling. The Flemen Dialis was bound by all these strict religious taboos.
He couldn't ride a horse, touch iron,
or even sleep away from Rome for a single night. A military or political career would have been virtually impossible. The fact he was named to this post strongly suggests that at the time his political prospects were considered, pretty low.
And then Sulla wins the Civil War and starts purging his political enemies. And Caesar's connected to all of them.
He's connected by blood and by marriage. His Aunt Julia was the widow of Gaius Marius, Sulla's greatest enemy.
And Caesar himself had married Cornelia, the daughter of Sulla's other main rival, Lucius Cornelius Cinna.
So Sulla orders Caesar to do two things. First, abdicate the priesthood. Second, and more critically, to divorce Cornelia.
The stakes could not have been higher.
No. Refusing to obey Sulla, the man who had just proscribed thousands of Romans, was essentially inviting a death sentence.
And what does Caesar do?
He refuses both demands. He implicitly questions Sulla's authority and the legitimacy of his decrees. And for that, he was likely put on the proscription lists, or at least summoned for interrogation, which forced him to go into hiding.
But he gets out of it. We have sources suggesting that Sulla was eventually persuaded to grant clemency.
Yes, due to the intercession of Caesar's powerful relatives and, importantly, the respected Vestal virgins.
So what does that compromise tell us about Caesar's character so early on?
It demonstrates extraordinary steel, an unwillingness to bend on matters of personal and political principle, especially when you compare him to others who just folded under Sulla's reign.
There was a compromise, though.
Right. He resigns the restrictive priesthood, which actually frees him up for a political career, but he gets to keep his wife. It's a moment that foreshadows the ruthless political operator he would become. He knew when to yield a minor point to preserve a major one.
His reputation for loyalty, his marriage, and his political freedom.
Exactly. And it was during this turbulent period that Sulla allegedly made that famous, chilling remark about him.
The legendary warning.
Yes, that Sulla saw in Caesar many Mariuses. Now, historical evidence suggests Sulla was more careful about executing fellow patricians, but the quote, "It perfectly encapsulates the fear that Caesar's ambition, even at a young age, was untamed and threatened the established order."
And it became part of the political narrative used by his enemies for decades.
Absolutely. So after escaping Sulla's regime, Caesar goes overseas for military service and gets his first taste of real military honor.
This is when he earns the civic crown.
Yes, for saving a fellow citizen at the siege of Mytilene in 81 BC. And you have to understand that crown was a huge deal.
What kind of privileges came with it?
It was the highest military decoration a Roman citizen could receive. The recipient had the right to wear the crown at public occasions, and whenever he entered the Senate, the senators were required to stand in his honor.
So it's more than just a medal. It's a permanent public reminder of his valor.
And according to the sources, it whetted his appetite for public honor. He realized the incredible power of visible status.
And we have the dramatic, almost cinematic story of the pirate ransom. He's traveling to Rhodes to study rhetoric.
And this incident, as recounted by Plutarch and Suetonius, it just gives you this perfect window into his confidence and his audacity. He gets intercepted by Cilician pirates and held for ransom.
And the legend claims that when the pirates demanded 20 talents,
Caesar insisted they demand 50. He claimed he was worth more. He allegedly commanded them to be quiet while he slept, criticized their poetry, and swore that once he was freed, he would return and execute every last one of them.
which sounds like pure bluster. But he followed through.
He did. After the ransom was paid and he secured his release, he immediately raised a fleet, returned to the island where he'd been held, and captured the pirates.
And executed them.
Well, depending on the source, either executed them or, more likely given Roman practice, sold them into slavery. But regardless of the exact details, the action was swift, decisive, and vindictive. It cemented his reputation for having the courage of his conviction.
And it demonstrated a pragmatic ruthlessness that would become his hallmark.
Absolutely. So when he returns to Rome, he starts his climb up the political ladder, and the ascent was very strategic. In 73 BC, he's co-opted into the pontifices, which marks him as a recognized member of the aristocracy.
Then comes the high-stakes political theater in 69 BC, following the deaths of his Aunt Julia and his wife Cornelia.
At their public funerals, Caesar gave eulogies, which was pretty standard aristocratic practice. But at Julia's funeral, he went a step further.
He displayed the imagines, the wax masks of her deceased husband, Gaius Marius.
Which was deeply shocking to the Sullan establishment. Marius's images had been banned and suppressed after the Civil War.
So this wasn't just a heartfelt family eulogy. This was a calculated political statement.
Oh, absolutely. It was establishing him as the heir to the popular Marian faction.
He's positioning himself as a popular leader.
Precisely. While Plutarch saw it as just blatant factionalism, it was strategically brilliant. He was appealing directly to the urban plebs who revered Marius and establishing his identity as someone who would champion popular rights against the entrenched optimates, the hardline senatorial elite.
He also started building bridges with Rome's most powerful military figure at the time, Pompey.
Yes, he actively supported the legislation, granting Pompey these extraordinary commands, like the Lex Gabinia against piracy and the Lex Manilia for the Third Mithridatic War.
So this wasn't merely supporting good policy.
Not at all. This was laying the groundwork for future cooperation. He saw Pompey as a key strategic ally for his own future.
And that alliance solidified as Caesar pursued the traditional sequence of Roman magistracies, the cursus honorum.
Right. And as curule aedile in 65 BC, he staged these famously lavish public games, absolutely necessary to win popular support, but it also caused him to accumulate just massive debts.
And it was during his aedileship that he publicly restored the military trophies of Marius that Sulla had removed.
Yes, and ancient sources often frame this as some secret overnight operation where he snuck the trophies back up.
Which sounds a bit dramatic.
That narrative, while great theater, is almost certainly political embellishment. Restoring massive public monuments and their bronze sculptures isn't exactly a secret task. You need architects, financing, workmen. It was a well-planned public event designed to reinforce his image.
The man of the people, the champion of the Marian legacy.
Despite immediate and fierce objections from conservative senators like Cassius, everything Caesar did was a public relations move.
His ascent then climaxed in 63 BC when he sought and won the highest state religious office, Pontifex Maximus.
And this was shocking to Rome. He surprisingly defeated two entrenched, highly influential senators, Catullus and Esoricus.
How did a relatively junior figure pull that off?
Well, it suggests he had either immense popular support or immense financial backing, or probably both. Ancient sources definitely allege massive bribery, possibly underwritten by Crassus or Pompey.
But whether it was bribery or popular appeal, the victory marked him as an unstoppable political force.
It showed he was capable of beating the established senatorial elite at their own game.
And that same year, 63 BC, saw the famous Catilinarian conspiracy. The Senate is debating the fate of arrested conspirators caught plotting rebellion.
And as praetor-elect, Caesar speaks out against the immediate execution of citizens without trial. This was a crucial constitutional moment that really defined his political stance.
What was the core issue here?
It was all about the Lex Sempronia de Capite Civis, which guaranteed Roman citizens the right to appeal capital punishment to the people. The hardliners, led by Cato, wanted immediate execution under the Senate's Senatus Consultum Ultimum, the final decree.
They claimed the conspirators had forfeited their citizenship rights.
Right. But Caesar's position was brilliantly clever. He advocated for a compromise.
Which
perpetual life imprisonment, possibly pending trial, coupled with the confiscation of all their property. It was harsh, but it avoided violating the constitutional right of appeal for citizens.
So he wasn't just being merciful.
Not at all. He was positioning himself as the true, principled defender of Roman libertas and constitutional tradition against what he framed as the desperate, illegal overreach of the conservative Senate.
And that stance secured him deep, long-term popular loyalty.
It did, though ultimately, Cato's impassioned speech swayed the Senate toward immediate execution. Caesar failed on the immediate vote, but he absolutely won the long-term popular loyalty battle.
His subsequent year as praetor in 62 BC saw further aggressive maneuvering.
Yes, including an attempt to strip Catullus of the honor of completing the rebuilt temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus and assign the task to Pompey instead.
That proposal quickly dissolved, though, showing he had his limits. But then he gets involved in the famous Bona Dea affair.
Ah, yes, where Publius Clodius Pulcher snuck into Caesar's house during a sacred female religious observance. The religious sacrilege was massive.
And Caesar, despite testifying that he knew nothing of Clodius's actions, immediately divorced his wife, Pompeia.
Right, claiming that Caesar's wife needed to be above suspicion. That famous line demonstrated his commitment to his public image over any private feelings. He turned a personal scandal into a demonstration of Roman gravitas.
So after his praetorship, Caesar is deeply in debt from his lavish campaigns,
which sets the stage for his governorship of Hispania Ulterior. He needed a military victory and, more importantly, plunder to pay off those debts.
And he got it. He campaigned successfully against the Collassi and Lusitani, seized enough plunder to pay his creditors, and was hailed imperator by his troops.
So when he returns to Rome in the summer of 60 BC, he faces this critical choice forced on him by his senatorial enemies, particularly Cato.
The choice between a triumph and the consulship.
Exactly. He had to remain outside Rome's sacred boundary, the Pomerium, to await a triumph or cross it, forfeit the triumph in his command to declare his candidacy for the consulship in person.
And Cato successfully filibustered any attempt to waive that requirement.
Caesar's decision here is key to understanding his ambition. He chose the consulship. He valued ultimate political power and executive command over immediate symbolic military glory.
That signaled to everyone that his sights were set on long-term domination, not just temporary accolades.
And the path to that consulship was defined by the political masterstroke of the First Triumvirate, this informal extra-legal alliance between Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus.
It was purely transactional, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Driven by mutual, unmet goals.
That's the core of it. The constitutional system had become so gridlocked that the three most powerful men in Rome, a military hero, a financial titan, and a rising political star, had to form a private compact just to get anything done.
Pompey urgently needed the Senate to ratify his eastern settlements and grant land to his veterans,
which the Senate had blocked for years out of, well, petty jealousy. And Crassus needed financial relief, specifically a massive write-down for the tax farmers in the province of Asia.
And Caesar, the junior partner in all this.
He needed their combined financial and military weight to ensure he won the consulship, and crucially to secure a long-term, extended military command after his consulship ended. That would guarantee him immunity from prosecution and give him a chance for more glory.
So the triumvirate was the ultimate manifestation of the Republic's breakdown.
It really was. With their support, Caesar wins the consulship for 59 BC. But the Senate ensures his co-consul will be his long-standing, bitter enemy, Marcus Calpurnius Bibulus.
Bibulus was elected purely to obstruct everything Caesar tried to do.
But Caesar starts his consulship with a revolutionary act. He immediately begins publishing the minutes of the Senate and the assemblies, a novel move, signaling accountability to the public.
But more importantly, forcing the Senate to conduct its obstructionist business under the public gaze.
His legislative agenda was centered on land reform, designed to distribute land to Pompey's veterans and the urban poor. He first brought it to the Senate,
hoping they would accept the inevitable, but the obstruction was absolute.
Cato filibustered the bill, speaking relentlessly until the sun set and the Senate had to adjourn. So Caesar, seeing the impossibility of working within the traditional structure, moved the bill directly before the popular assembly.
And here is where the constitutional crisis truly boiled over. Bibulus attempted a permanent veto for the entire year based on announcing unfavorable auspices,
which was seen as a profound violation of the people's legislative sovereignty. A massive riot erupted in the forum. Bibulus's fasces, the symbols of his authority, were broken. Witnesses claim he was pelted with excrement. He was forced to flee.
And the land bill was passed.
Caesar capitalized immediately, passing Crassus's tax write-down and the ratification of Pompey's eastern settlements. Following these humiliating defeats, Bibulus just withdrew entirely.
He secluded himself in his home for the rest of the year, issuing these edicts in absentia trying to cancel all voting days for religious reasons.
Which failed to stop Caesar's legislative agenda, but it created this image of total autocratic control.
Which, of course, led to the famous political barb that it wasn't the consulship of Bibulus and Caesar, but the consulship of Julius and Caesar.
And what that joke tells us is that the core principle of Roman constitutionalism collegiality, the idea that power must be shared, was already dead. Bibulus's voluntary withdrawal created a de facto sole magistracy, a temporary monarchy.
The public laughed, but the political elite saw a terrifying preview of the future.
A republic where one man could dominate all legislative and executive functions simply by force and popular support.
Caesar then secured his long-term goal. The Lex Vatini assigned the provinces of Illyricum and Cisalpine Gaul to him for 5 years.
And the Senate, probably just wanting to get him out of Rome, reluctantly added Transalpine Gaul.
With that extended military command secured, the alliance was sealed when Pompey married Caesar's only legitimate child, his daughter Julia.
And Caesar left for Gaul, embarking on the campaigns that would transform his reputation, his fortune, and Rome itself.
So the Gallic Wars, between 58 and 51 BC, this was a massive undertaking.
It was. It greatly extended Roman territory up to the Rhine and transformed Caesar into Rome's foremost military commander.
How did he manage this conquest? It was a huge area with many different peoples.
He employed classic Roman military superiority, of course, but his greatest political asset was exploiting the deep-seated internal divisions among the numerous Gallic tribes. They were not a unified bloc. They were constantly warring, and Caesar skillfully manipulated those rivalries.
Playing them off against each other.
Exactly, signing treaties, supporting favored leaders, and then crushing those who opposed him.
Let's highlight some of the key military feats, the aha moments of his campaign that really showcase Roman power.
Well, the two most famous are probably the bridge across the river Rhine and the expeditions into Britain.
The Rhine Bridge was a huge feat of engineering, wasn't it?
It was, and it wasn't meant to be permanent. It was built in just 10 days, and its purpose was pure power projection. It showed that Rome could go wherever it pleased. It was military theater of the highest order. Then he dismantled it and returned.
And his two expeditions into southern Britain in 55 and 54 BC. To the Romans, Britain was almost a mythical land.
It was. It was seen as the island of mystery, a land of wonder. So invading it, even if briefly and without lasting conquest, provided spectacular material for his dispatches back home.
It buttressed his military reputation and distracted from political troubles in Rome.
Pure political messaging wrapped in military activity.
The core conflict, though, came with a massive uprising of central Gaul, led by Vercingetorix of the Averni. And Caesar actually suffered a rare defeat at Gergovia.
Gergovia was a significant setback. It forced Caesar to confront the true power of a unified Gallic resistance, but he rebounded quickly at the critical siege of Alesia.
Which was an engineering masterpiece. He built two massive lines of fortification.
One inward to keep the city besieged, and one outward to defend against the arriving Gallic relief army. It was a siege within a siege.
An incredible gamble.
And it paid off. The decisive victory over Vercingetorix at Alesia concluded the major phase of the war and cemented Roman control over a vast new territory.
And the entire time, Caesar was controlling the political narrative back home through his annual dispatches, his commentari de bello Gallico.
We called it polished propaganda, and that's exactly what it was. The commentari are acknowledged as a Latin literary masterwork for their clear, direct, third-person style, which makes everything feel so objective.
But the manipulation is subtle and constant.
Yes. First, they were published annually, so Caesar dominated the news cycle and maintained support for his distant wars. Second, they consistently magnified his victories and minimized his atrocities.
Can you give a specific example of the spin?
Look at Gergovia. He presents the defeat not as a failure of his strategy, but as a failure of his impatient, overzealous troops who disobeyed orders. He frames himself as the rational, cautious general whose plans were undermined by the impulsiveness of his men.
It's never his fault.
Never. The commentari also served to dehumanize the Gauls, portraying them as barbaric and inherently prone to treachery, which then justifies the brutality of the conquest to his Roman audience.
Meanwhile, the political situation in Rome was deteriorating. The Triumvirate was struggling.
It was fragile. Clodius's actions against Pompey forced Caesar to renew the alliance in 56 BC, granting himself another 5-year extension of command. But the personal bonds were breaking.
In 54 BC, Julia, Pompey's wife and Caesar's daughter, died in childbirth,
which removed the primary personal link between the two men. Then came the crushing death of Crassus at the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BC,
where he lost the Roman standards and his entire army.
And that removed the final mediator and financial counterbalance. It left Pompey, now politically allied with the conservative Senate, and Caesar as the two sole giants destined for confrontation.
Following his final victory at Alesia in 52 BC, Caesar was showered with honors.
An unprecedented 20 days of Thanksgiving, and the Senate grudgingly passed the law of the 10 tribunes, allowing him to stand for the consulship in absentia.
But the hardline Senate led by Cato and Bibulus was desperate.
They feared his return with an army and sought to enlist Pompey to force Caesar to return to Rome without honors or command, stripping him of his proconsular immunity and leaving him vulnerable to prosecution.
That fear of prosecution, conviction, and exile is often cited as the primary reason why Caesar eventually marched on Rome.
That's certainly part of it, but we have to look deeper. The core of his motivation, drawn from his own writings, was the defense of his dignitas, his personal honor and reputation, and securing his second consulship.
He feared his opponents would use legal maneuvers or outright force to prevent the Roman people from electing him.
Exactly. And the expulsion of his supportive tribunes from Rome on January 7, 49 BC was the confirmation of that fear. It was the final straw.
When his final offer to disarm alongside Pompey was rejected by the hardliners, the Senate issued the Senatus Consultum Ultimum.
The final decree declaring him an enemy of the state. This was the point of no return. Around January 10 or 11, 49 BC, Caesar openly defied the Republic by crossing the Rubicon.
The small river defining the northern border of Italy.
With a single legion, the Legio XIII Gemina.
And that's where we get the iconic line, Alia iacta est.
Let the die be cast. The civil war had begun.
Pompey and many senators, shocked by the speed of his advance, fled south, abandoning Italy.
They eventually escaped to Greece. Caesar quickly secured Rome, but his actions immediately undercut his stated justification for the war.
How so?
Well, he had claimed to be marching to protect the liberty and rights of the tribunes. Yet, shortly after reaching Rome, he needed funds. And when a tribune vetoed his attempt to access the state treasury, Caesar simply brushed the veto aside and seized the money by force.
So the very position he claimed to be defending, he immediately ignored when it was inconvenient.
It exposed the fundamental hypocrisy that this war was ultimately about personal power, not constitutional principle.
Caesar resigned his brief, constitutionally questionable dictatorship and then left for Greece. After a tactical defeat at Dyrrhachium, the decisive moment came at the Battle of Pharsalus in August 48 BC.
Where Caesar overwhelmingly defeated Pompey, Pompey fled to Egypt, while Cato fled to Africa to organize the ongoing resistance.
And many prominent Republican figures, like Cicero and Marcus Junius Brutus, sought and received Caesar's policy of clementia.
Clemency, or mercy. He cultivated this to contrast his rule with Sulla's vengeful dictatorship.
Pompey expected refuge in Alexandria, but was immediately assassinated upon arrival by agents of the child pharaoh Ptolemy III.
Right. Caesar landed 3 days later, expecting to pursue his rival, but instead found himself caught up in the local politics. He was presented with Pompey's head.
And he reportedly wept.
Not out of respect for his former son-in-law, but out of disgust at the barbarity of the act against a fellow Roman consul. Due to the winds, he was stuck in the city and decided to arbitrate the civil war between Ptolemy III and his sister wife, Cleopatra VII.
This quickly evolved to the Alexandrine War. He installed Cleopatra as ruler and began a famous affair with her.
And this is where we get the major political complication. Cleopatra gave birth to Caesar's son, Caesarion. Though unacknowledged by Caesar in Rome, his existence cemented the crucial political alliance between Rome and Egypt.
And Caesar stayed in Egypt far longer than was militarily necessary.
He did, until mid-July 47 BC, which suggests this was not merely a military occupation, but a political and personal entrenchment.
After finally leaving Egypt, Caesar swiftly dealt with a threat in Asia Minor, defeating King Pharnaces.
And this is where we get the most famous and concise of his military reports. Vimedi, Vedi, Vici.
I came, I saw, I conquered.
It's a brilliant piece of propaganda. It highlights the speed and inevitability of his victory, cementing his image as an almost divine commander. Meanwhile, back in Rome, Mark Antony,
whom Caesar had left in charge as Magister Equitum,
was making a terrible mess. His rule was marked by suppressing debt relief riots with lethal force, severely damaging the popularity of Caesar's cause in Rome.
So Caesar was forced to demote him upon his return.
Yes. Caesar then turned his attention to crushing the remaining Republican resistance. Cato and Metellus Scipio had gathered forces in Africa, allied with King Juba of Numidia.
The campaign was difficult, but Caesar regrouped and decisively defeated them at the Battle of Thapsus in April 46 BC.
And following that defeat, we have the indelible image of Cato. He commanded at Utica and chose to commit suicide rather than accept Caesar's clemency.
He turned himself into a powerful, permanent martyr for the lost republic.
Absolutely. The final grueling showdown was at Munda in Spain in March 45 BC against Pompey's sons. It was a close-run thing. Sources suggest Caesar was nearly defeated.
But he won. And he treated his enemies as rebels, massacring them on the battlefield. The fact he was fighting Romans to the death for years showed how far the Republic had fallen.
Upon his return, he celebrated 4 elaborate, magnificent triumphs, although nominally over foreign enemies.
Gaul, Egypt, Asia, and Juba.
The celebrations were deeply divisive. Appian noted that Caesar paraded images and models that clearly referenced his victories over fellow Romans. It was seen as an unseemly triumph.
It demonstrated his willingness to flout tradition, to reinforce his personal victory over the Roman elite.
By this point, he was already planning a massive 3-year campaign against the Parthians, but his political structure at home was already alienating the class he needed to govern with.
Which brings us to the nature of his dictatorship. Caesar had held the title of dictator multiple times since 49 BC.
But the fundamental change came in early February 44 BC when he assumed the title of Dictator Perpetuo.
Dictator for life. This was the nail in the coffin for the Republic.
It immediately ended all hope that the traditional constitution could ever be restored as long as Caesar lived. And you have to differentiate this from the traditional Roman dictatorship.
Which was a temporary 6-month emergency office.
Exactly. By accepting the dictatorship for life, Caesar wasn't just maximizing his power, he was fundamentally abolishing the foundational constitutional checks that define the Republic. He made himself a king in all but name.
And the Senate, filled with his supporters, then proceeded to shower him with honors that moved well beyond Republican practice and into the realm of divine monarchy.
The symbols were overt. He was granted the unique right to have his portrait placed on coins in Rome while he was still living, a first for a Roman.
He was granted overtly royal dress, the right to wear the laurel wreath at all times,
and the ability to sit atop a golden chair in the Senate. They even renamed the month Quintilis to Julius, or July, in his honor.
All highly visible symbols designed to project monarchical power. And it was these symbols, perhaps more than his actual legislation, that fueled the growing resentment.
Absolutely. The political class valued dignitas and libertas, dignity and freedom, and the idea that one man could so totally dominate the public sphere was intolerable. He was constantly ignoring or overriding the traditional institutions of the Republic.
Yet, despite the autocratic power grab, he ran a surprisingly vigorous and effective reform program.
He did. The most enduring structural achievement is, of course, the Julian calendar,
which abolished the messy, chaotic, old lunisolar calendar
and replaced it with a solar calendar accurate to the civil year. This wasn't just a technical fix, it was an essential administrative achievement for a growing empire.
He also tackled administrative expansion, increasing the number of magistrates and the size of the Senate from 600 to 900 members.
And that sounds like a reform, but it served two purposes. First, it rewarded his numerous supporters. Second, and more subtly, it made the Senate incapable of operating properly. A Senate of 900 is a sprawling, diluted body, easily ignored.
He also addressed Rome's massive population problem and veteran issues.
Yes, he reduced Rome's population by founding new overseas colonies, settling veterans and the urban poor, famously on the formerly destroyed sites of Carthage and Corinth.
And he tackled the grain dole.
He reduced its size from 320,000 recipients to about 150,000 by tightening qualifications. More sustainable, but unpopular with those who were cut off.
And his policy of clemency was paired with political heavy-handedness, particularly how he handled the consulship.
Yes, his continuous focus was on rewarding loyalty. He would resign his consulship so his allies could immediately take it up for the rest of the year. In one famous instance, he had an ally elected consul for a single day.
Which reinforces the sense among the elite that all honors, all offices and statuses, were merely personal favors bestowed by the dictator.
It rendered their aristocratic careers meaningless.
And this brings us to the seeds of tyranny, leading directly to the Ides of March. The dictator perpetuo title was one thing, but the attempts to call him Rex King were the final, intolerable line.
The term Rex was an absolute poison pill in Roman political culture, associated with arbitrary, inherited oppression, when tribunes tried to shut down the attempts by the crowd to call Caesar king.
Caesar, infuriated, had the tribunes deposed and ejected from the Senate.
A colossal political blunder. It undermined the very justification he had used to start the civil war, protecting the rights of tribunes, and it angered the populace.
Then came the famous Lupercalia festival, just days after he became dictator for life. Mark Antony publicly offered him a diadem,
the symbol of a Hellenistic monarch. Caesar publicly rejected it to the applause of the crowd, but the damage was done.
Whether he rejected it out of principle or just because the crowd wasn't supportive enough is still debated.
But the rumor that he sought a formal crown persisted. And the political reality was that he was already functioning as an effective monarch who had abolished open elections. That was the core constitutional motivation for the conspiracy.
The composition of this conspiracy is fascinating. It wasn't just his defeated enemies.
No, this is the critical insight. It included approximately 60 people, and many of them were his own loyal Caesarian supporters. Men like Decimus Brutus, who was his trusted general, and even named an heir in his will.
Their motivation was primarily constitutional. They feared he intended to make his rule hereditary and formalize the kingship.
And they were angry over the effective abolition of meaningful elections, which stripped their careers of the dignity of free competition. They killed him not because they hated him personally, but because they believed the Republic could not survive his living rule.
Marcus Junius Brutus, who claimed descent from the Brutus, who drove out the kings centuries earlier, was the ideological figurehead.
And the sources report public graffiti challenging him, saying, "You are no true Brutus if you tolerate a king." That kind of public pressure shows a genuine turn in opinion against Caesar's domination.
The conspirators were forced to move fast, because Caesar was scheduled to leave for his massive Parthian campaign on March 18th.
So they had to act at the last Senate meeting before his departure, the Ides of March, March 15th.
The location was chosen for maximum symbolic impact. The Curia Pompeii at the foot of the statue of the man Caesar had defeated.
The irony is brutal. Caesar refused a bodyguard, trusting in his clemency policy, and walked into the Senate. The conspirators approached him on his golden chair.
And he was stabbed at least 23 times.
The final dramatic question, of course, are his last words. Did he simply fall in silence, as Suetonius suggests?
Or did he utter the alleged, "You too, child"?
While the silence is historically more probable, the dramatic line highlights the personal betrayal, especially about Brutus. The result, regardless, was immediate chaos. The assassins fled to the Capitoline Hill, expecting to be hailed as liberators, but they were met with cold public silence.
And this created a massive political vacuum that Mark Antony, the Roman consul, masterfully exploited.
He secured a compromise. Caesar was not declared a tyrant, meaning all his laws and appointments stood, which preserved the status of Antony and many senators. In return, the conspirators were not immediately punished.
But that was temporary. Antony's oration at Caesar's massive public funeral was brilliant political theater.
By reading Caesar's will, which granted a generous donative to every Roman pleb, and by displaying Caesar's blood-stained toga and wounds, he inflamed the public against the assassins. Mob violence erupted, forcing the conspirators to flee Rome permanently.
And the reading of the will sealed the political future, adopting his great-nephew, the then 19-year-old Gaius Octavius, as his principal heir.
The rise of Octavian is directly tied to the cult of his deified father. A 7-day cometary outburst shortly after Caesar's death. Caesar's comet was interpreted by the Romans as the immediate deification of Caesar.
The Republic was dead, and the new political era had a divine patron.
New civil wars erupted, with Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus forming the Second Triumvirate, securing the formal deification of Caesar in 42 BC and defeating the tyrannicides.
Ultimately, Octavian seized sole control, establishing a mass autocracy that was acceptable to the war-weary Romans, transforming the Republic into the Roman Empire as Augustus. The assassination, meant to save liberty, merely accelerated the consolidation of absolute power.
Beyond the seismic political events, the ancient sources give us a truly vivid picture of Caesar the man.
Starting with his physical health and appearance, Suetonius described him as tall, fair-complexioned, with keen black eyes.
And famously, he was extremely sensitive about his balding, using a comb-over. This is why he was so pleased to be granted the unique honor of wearing a laurel wreath at all times. It conveniently concealed his vanity.
It speaks to a man who was acutely aware of his public presentation.
There is also the intensive debate about his health. Later sources like Suetonius suggest he suffered from the falling sickness, or epilepsy, based on accounts of 4 seizures.
But modern medical scholarship has provided counterarguments. Why is the epilepsy diagnosis not universally accepted today?
Because the description of the seizures doesn't perfectly match modern criteria. Medical historians suggest he may have suffered from cerebral malaria or perhaps cerebrovascular episodes, like a series of small strokes.
Which could explain the sudden deaths of his father and forefather.
Exactly. Whatever the cause, he was clearly a man driven by ambition despite chronic physical ailments.
And we can't ignore the personal slander that followed him, particularly the rumors concerning his sexuality.
This was a brutal but common form of political attack. Roman society rigidly viewed the passive role in sexual activity as a sign of submission and effeminacy, which was shameful for a Roman male leader.
So his enemies, including Cicero, repeatedly referred to him as the Queen of Bithynia,
referencing persistent rumors of an affair with King Nicomedes IV early in his career. The rumor itself was more important than the truth. It was a potent political weapon to imply he was subservient and thus unfit to rule Romans.
And what about the rumor that Marcus Junius Brutus was his illegitimate son?
Highly skeptical, both among ancient and modern historians, primarily based on chronology. Caesar was only about 15 when Brutus was born. It seems to be purely political gossip, added for dramatic effect.
Beyond the battlefield and the bedroom, Caesar was an intellectual powerhouse.
Highly regarded as one of the best Latin prose authors and orators of his day, even by his great rival Cicero. His surviving works are masterpieces of clear, concise Latin prose, a style that projects confidence and control.
And his political and personal dominance is codified in his enduring political legacy, which we define as Caesarism.
Caesarism is a precise political model, a form of rule led by a charismatic strongman, relying on a deeply personal cult of personality, often cemented by the prominence and direct support of the military.
And we see figures throughout history explicitly adopting this model.
Absolutely. Figures like Napoleon Bonaparte and Benito Mussolini explicitly define themselves as inheritors of the Caesarist tradition. They saw him as the definitive example of a leader who successfully transcended petty partisan squabbling through military authority.
So, if we look back at the entirety of this deep dive, Caesar stands as the supreme military commander, an aggressive administrative reformer, and ultimately the irreversible catalyst for the fall of the constitutional Roman Republic.
He achieved monarchy by rejecting the crown, and his influence remains tangible today. The remains of Caesar's altar in the Roman Forum, the exact spot where he was cremated, is still a pilgrimage site. People leave flowers there daily, especially on the Ides of March.
He is still actively venerated almost 2,000 years later.
It's incredible.
We've explored the assassination as the desperate attempt by the conspirators to restore the free republic, to kill the dictator and allow constitutional government to live again. But we know what happened next.
His heir, Octavian, secured Caesar's deification and went on to establish a masked autocracy acceptable to the war-weary Romans.
So this is the provocative thought we want to leave with you. The conspirators killed the dictator to save the republic, believing they were acting as liberators.
But by eliminating Caesar, they removed the one man who had the personal charisma and military authority to possibly keep the centralized structure he created under any sort of single, stable control. Did the Ides of March inadvertently accelerate the transition to absolute monarchy?
Did they prove that the constitutional government of the republic was already too fractured, too corrupt, and simply impossible to restore in a world defined by military power? What stands out to you as the greatest consequence of the Ides of March?